The Bach coal as medicine, Palamas, Ambrose, neuroscience, and the healing of every wound. Welcome back. In episodes 1 through 3 we excavated the Vav nail, the pictographic letters of Zuccan, the audible pun with shaming, the apatheia of the Desert Fathers, the Erickson model of ego integrity, the military image of the Septuagint, the Syriac Peshitta, the Targums, the Kabbalistic Bina, the chiasm of Genesis 24, the Peel stem and the kneeling etymology of Barak, the Aleph Tav as the name of Christ, the gematria of Ba Kol equaling Ben, and the voices of Rashi, the Ramban, Origen, Augustine, and Chrysostom. Today we go into the healing dimensions of verse 1 with maximum depth. Ambrose of Milan, the great bishop of the 4th century who baptized Augustine and whose theological formation shaped the entire Western Christian tradition for the centuries that followed, took the comprehensive blessing of verse 1 and connected it to the mystery of covenant faithfulness operating through time. Ambrose wrote that the God who blessed Abraham Ba Kol was the same God who had been active in every apparently barren and silent season of Abraham's life, who had been weaving the Ba Kol together from threads that looked, in isolation, like tragedy. He was active in the years before Isaac's birth, years of long waiting in apparent divine silence. He was active in the darkness before the resolution of Moriah. He was active in the grief of Sarah's burial. And Ambrose pointed to the placement of the Ba Kol declaration, immediately after chapter 23's burial narrative, as the Torah's own theological commentary on grief. The Ba Kol is not placed before the grief. It is placed after it. And that placement says something that no grief counselor of the ancient or the modern world has said more powerfully: the comprehensive blessing of God outlasts the comprehensive depth of the greatest human laws. Gregory Palamas, the Archbishop of Thessalonica in the 14th century and the great defender of Hesychast theology, whose doctrine of the distinction between the divine essence and the divine energies represents the most sophisticated articulation of the divine human encounter in the Eastern Christian tradition, saw in the Ba Kol of verse 1 the most perfect illustration of his central teaching. For Palamas, God in his divine essence is utterly beyond all human comprehension, infinitely transcendent, inaccessible to the creaturely mind. But God in his divine energies, the uncreated light, the living radiance of divine love that extends from the divine being into the created world, is genuinely and fully present to the creation. And Abraham's Ba Kol is the testimony of a life that has been saturated with the divine energies. The grey in Abraham's beard and the settled gravity of his movements and the authoritative simplicity of his speech in Genesis 24 are all the visible evidence of a man who has been, for a century, inhabited by the uncreated light of the living God. The Etnach, the great disjunctive accent we discussed in episode 2, falls musically on the word Ba Kol in the Masoretic text. And this means that the cantillation of the Torah creates a full musical stop on the words in all things. The music holds there. It pauses. It sits in the silence of the Ba Kol before moving on. As if the Torah's own voice is saying, "Let this land. Let this truth settle into the listener before the narrative continues. Do not rush past the Ba Kol. The Ba Kol is the point. Let it do its work. And its work is healing work. Because there is a wound in the modern soul that the Ba Kol is specifically designed to address. Modern psychology has given this wound various names. Low self-worth. Negative core beliefs. The inner critic. The shame-based self. Bessel van der Kolk, in his landmark work The Body Keeps the Score, described how trauma creates not merely a memory of danger but an ongoing neurological state of threat, a condition in which the nervous system is perpetually scanning for evidence that confirms the traumatic narrative. I am not safe, I am not enough, I am not worthy of the fullness of good things. This neurological state of threat operates below the level of conscious decision making. It is wired into the body's implicit memory, the right hemisphere relational templates that were formed in the earliest attachment experiences and that continue to govern emotional responses long after the conscious mind has intellectually accepted a different story. The Ba-Kol of Genesis 24, verse 1, is medicine at exactly this level. Not merely a theological proposition for the mind to accept, but a healing declaration that, when received repeatedly with the full faith of a praying soul, begins to create new neurological pathways in the brain's representation of the self and its relationship to God. The research on narrative coherence in trauma recovery, developed by clinicians including Dan McAdams in his work on personal mythology and Mary Main in her adult attachment interview, consistently shows that the capacity to integrate painful experiences into a coherent life narrative is one of the most powerful predictors of psychological resilience and post-traumatic growth. And the Ba-Kol is exactly this kind of integrating declaration. It says, all of it, the painful and the beautiful, the lost and the found, the wounds and the healings, the weights and the fulfillments, all of it was inside the canopy of divine blessing. Not some of it. Not the good parts. All of it. Ba-Kol. And when that declaration is received at the level where the trauma lives, in the body, in the implicit memory, in the felt sense of the self in relation to the sacred, it begins to do what medication and cognitive therapy alone cannot do. It begins to heal the narrative from the inside out. The neuroscientist Dr. Daniel Siegel, in his work on interpersonal neurobiology, describes the human brain's need for what he calls the 4 S's of secure attachment: feeling seen, feeling safe, feeling soothed, and feeling secure. These are the 4 qualities of the attachment relationship that allow the developing child to grow into psychological wholeness, and their absence is what produces the deepest wounds. And the Ba-Kol of Genesis 24 speaks directly into each of these 4 needs. Seen, the Lord had blessed Abraham. God saw Abraham comprehensively, saw every chapter of his life, saw every hidden dimension of his experience. Safe, the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. Every area of Abraham's life was inside the divine canopy. Nothing was outside God's care. Soothed, the Peel Barak, the kneeling God, the intensity of divine giving, is the image of the soothing presence of the one who stoops to meet you where you are. And secure, the Ba-Kol is not a temporary state. It is the declaration of a God whose covenant faithfulness is as stable as his eternal nature. The inner child who learned, in early experience, that they were not seen or safe or soothed or secure, finds in the Ba-Kol of verse 1 a counter-experience. Not merely a counter-argument. Counter-experience. Because the God who blessed Abraham Ba-Kol is the same God who is speaking to the inner child of every listening soul right now. And what he is saying to that child is, I see you. I have always seen you. Even the chapters you were ashamed of. Even the chapters you tried to hide. Even the chapters you never told anyone about. I was in all of them. And all of them were inside my blessing. The distinction that the text makes between Abraham's outward condition and the Ba-Kol declaration is also profoundly healing. The text does not say the Lord blessed Abraham because he was prosperous or successful or spiritually perfect. The text places the Ba-Kol immediately after the description of Abraham's old age and his recent bereavement. The Ba-Kol is declared over a man who has just buried his wife and who is clearly nearing the end of his own life. The Ba-Kol is not a reward for a problem-free life. It is the testimony of a life in which every problem, every loss, every grief, every silence, was held inside the arms of a God who never let go. For the person listening today who has been told by the voice of their own inner critic or by the voices of others that they are not enough, not blessed enough, not worthy enough, not spiritual enough to receive the totality of God's favor, let this word be your medicine today. The Ba-Kol is not earned. It is given. It is the Peel Barak of a God who bends toward you, who kneels in the act of giving, who pours out the fullness of His blessing not because you have performed well enough but because you are His. Because you bear in your name, however imperfectly, the hay of His own divine breath. Because you are held inside the et aleph tav of His eternal Son who encompasses all of reality from first to last. And now the practical dimension. What does the Baqol ask of you in return for its healing gift? It asks you to do what Abraham did with it. Transmit it. Because the Ramban's insight is eternal, a blessing that ends with its recipient has not yet found its fullness. Your Baqol is not a trophy to polish and display. It is a seed to plant in the next generation. It is a word to speak over someone who has forgotten they are blessed. It is a mission to commission, a servant to send, a future to invest in, a child or a spiritual son or daughter to look in the eye and say, "The God of heaven and earth has blessed you in all things." Not some things. All things. Go. This is how the Baqol multiplies. This is how it travels from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to the 12 tribes to the nations to the Messiah to you to the person you will speak to tomorrow who has not yet heard that the Baqol has their name inside it. Now the ideal parent figure protocol developed by Dr. Daniel Brown and Dr. David Elliott, used in the treatment of complex attachment trauma, provides one of the most clinically precise connections to the Baqol declaration. This therapeutic protocol guides profoundly wounded individuals through the construction of an internal representation of a parent who offers the qualities of secure attachment that were missing in their early experience. The ideal parent figure is consistently available, fully attuned to the child's actual inner experience rather than the parent's own needs or projections. Genuinely delighted in the child's existence as a person rather than as a performance. Capable of being soothed by the child's distress and of transmitting that soothing back to the child. And reliably present across time in a way that creates internal security rather than chronic vigilance. The Baqol Declaration of Genesis 24, verse 1, is the scripture's own version of the ideal parent figure protocol applied to the relationship between God and the human soul. The Lord has blessed Abraham Baqol, fully, thoroughly, in every area, without exclusion, without condition, without the kind of partial favor that leaves some chambers of the soul in darkness. This is the ideal parent declaration. This is the antidote to the parental failure that left some area of your life feeling unblessed, unwatched, uncared for, outside the canopy of love. And the healing work that the ideal parent figure protocol offers is exactly what this declaration can do in the soul when it is received not merely as cognitive information but as spiritual medicine taken in with faith and prayer and the willingness to let it land in the deepest places. The psychological research shows that when individuals repeat the experience of being seen, safe, soothed, and secure in the context of the ideal parent figure visualization, new neural pathways are built in the brain's representation of the self in relationship. The implicit memory of abandonment begins to be supplemented, and eventually in part overwritten, by the implicit memory of being comprehensively held. And the God of Genesis 24 is not a therapeutic construct. He is the real source from which all genuine parental love derives its character. He is the original attunement, the ultimate delight, the ground of all security. And his Baqol is not a therapist's visualization exercise. It is the actual declaration of the actual living God over the actual arc of a real human life. When you receive the Baqol as medicine, you are not merely constructing a helpful fiction. You are receiving a true report from the one who was present in every chapter of your life and who declares, without reservation or qualification, that all of it, was inside his blessing. Now there is one more dimension of the Baqol that we must explore before we close this episode, and it is the dimension of what we might call completion without closure. One of the most striking features of verse 1 is that the Baqol declaration is placed immediately before the commission of chapter 24, not at the end of Abraham's story but in the middle of its final chapter. Abraham is Ba-Kol, comprehensively blessed. And yet the narrative immediately continues. The blessing has not produced retirement. The fullness has not produced inactivity. The completeness has not ended the calling. This introduces a profound spiritual principle that directly contradicts one of the most destructive myths in contemporary spiritual culture, the myth that the goal of the spiritual life is the attainment of a state of permanent personal fulfillment beyond which no further effort or mission is required. Abraham at verse 1 is as fulfilled as any human being can be. He has been blessed in all things. And he immediately begins the work of the most significant commission of his life. Completion does not eliminate calling. A person can be genuinely fulfilled by God and still be genuinely assigned by God. This is the counter word to every form of spiritual passivity that confuses the peace of God with the quietism of disengagement. Abraham's Ba-Kol produces not contentment with the status quo but the generous energy of transmission. He has so much that he must give. He is so filled that the filling must flow. The Ba-Kol of God is always generative. It always produces mission. It always overflows into the next generation. Speak this declaration over yourself today. I am blessed in all things. And because I am blessed in all things, I have something to give. I have a mission to commission. I have a servant to send. I have a future to invest in. I have a generation to bless. The Ba-Kol of God in my life is not a destination. It is a launch pad. Join us in episode 5 where we enter the identity of the servant, the word Harevd as worship and work, Eliezer the name meaning my God is help, the living parable of the Mashal, and the Trinitarian portrait of the Holy Spirit hidden in the namelessness of the servant of Genesis 24. Contact us at christ4life143@gmail.com. Subscribe, share, and stay tuned.